So Ms. Garvey will be joining us in a minute, and I think otherwise we are ready to begin with Christian Dorsey, Matt DeFerranti, and Eric Gutschall, and we'll turn it over to the manager to begin our Department of Parks and Recreation work session. Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With me today is the percipient and pertinacious Parks Director, Jane Rudolph.
Is that pertinacious? That's a new one to me.
Percipient and pertinacious, yes.
Pertinacious, okay, thank you.
She doesn't know.
They were all good, don't worry.
Thank you for the compliment. And thank you all for having me here. Should I just begin?
Please.
Great. So thanks for having me. And I'm joined by Becky Schmidt, our Department Finance Officer, Angie Lucas, who's our new Operating Budget Analyst, Kurt Lewis, Park and Recreation Park and Natural Resources Division Chief, Lisa Grandel, our Planning and Park Development Division Chief, Cheryl Johnson, Community Recreation Division Chief, and Peter Lusk, our Athletic and Facility Services Division Chief. And there's a whole bunch of other DPR folks here in the audience as well. And I want to thank them for being here, and thank you all. So before we get into the details of the budget, I wanted to give you an overview of our department. I'll let you do this. As you can see, we have our vision and mission statement up on the screen, but we also have 6 core values that support our vision and mission, and they are creativity, integrity, respect, safety, learning, and trust. And based on some recent conversations, we should probably explore how equity could fit into that as well. From the places and spaces that we manage and the programs that we deliver, the people we support, 2018 was once again a busy year for our department. Our public spaces bring people out of their homes, into the outdoors, facilitate social encounters, create a sense of belonging, and can provide a relaxation, excitement, and learning opportunities. In some regards, our park system is like Arlington's backyard. From casual use spaces to programmed activities to community centers, we strive to balance the many needs of our community within our constrained public space system. And with ever increased demanding for programs and services comes the need for us to look for ways to use our public spaces more creatively and to do so while balancing our financial resources. So I wanted to share a little bit about what we've been up to in DPR. We have great access to 144 parks, 13 community centers, and 49 miles of paved multi-use trails. But we also put on some really great programs and events. At our 3rd annual Paint, Build, Create event this past January, which had a STEAM theme, we had over 1,400 participants. That nearly doubled from the year before at 700. In our registered programs, we have nearly 25,000 unique participants, with each person taking an average of 2.7 activities per year. That's nearly 66,000 enrollments in 1 year. Nearly 80% of our Enjoy Arlington enrollments are are in youth ages. They have here 0 to 19, and that's because we even have programs for kids as early as 3 months. With that in mind, we've just consolidated several different age-based sections in our youth services section in the community recreation division to more efficiently use our resources and provide seamless delivery through all age groups. 98% of our DPR-run camps offered last summer were filled to capacity, and just this past February, on our first day of registration, we had over 5,000, 6,000 total registrations in 1 day. That's the most ever, 11% up from last year. We have 317 unique youth and 113 unique adult participants in our inclusion and adaptive programs. That picture on the bottom right is from our Project 5 summer camp that connects seniors from our Langston Brown Social Cafe program with youth and young adults in our TR, which is our therapeutic recreation programs, to eat and have fun together. The goal is to provide them with an opportunity to interact intergenerationally and promote community inclusion while breaking down perceptions about disability. Our teen program continues to put out the ever-popular Saturday night skate night at TJ with an averaging of 600 participants per night. With this past Saturday, we had an all-time high at nearly 900 participants. And our seniors continue to be very active in our programs at DPR. We had a 23% increase in enrollment in senior classes from FY17 to 18. It's about 5,000 enrollments, with most popular being yoga, aquatics, and aquatic exercise classes and Pilates. We also rebranded our former congregate meal program to the Social 60 Plus Cafe, with programs focusing more on not just serving hot meals, but presenting opportunities for social engagement and meaningful volunteer roles. As a result, we've had a nearly 8% increase in meals served. But it's not just about the people, it's also about our resources. We have 164 acres of invasive plants that are actively being managed, and 74 acres have been moved from maintenance because they're now successfully complete. We have over 5,000 native plants propagated, and we've just completed 8 capital projects in this fiscal year already, with another 6 anticipated to be complete by the end of June. And DPR is also responsible for 19,500 street trees as well as 100,000 park trees. And we just released a PSA on trees that I want to quickly share with you.
Hi, Arlington County is amazing because our trees are amazing.
No, seriously, our trees are so good for our community.
They filter the air, the streams, and provide homes for all our little critters.
And they're good for your wallet.
They are.
And this is backed up by numerous studies that show that homes on tree-lined streets versus streets that have no trees on them, they sell faster and for more than properties with no trees around them. Mature shade trees can actually increase your home's value by up to 15%.
And they provide shade.
Mature trees will make hot days cooler and they make cold days warmer. So you are definitely saving on your air conditioning costs, on your heating costs. If you have trees planted strategically around your property, you can save up to 25% on your energy costs.
They reduce flooding. They reduce flooding. I just said that.
Arlington helps homeowners and developers preserve trees whenever possible within the limits of the law.
Working with Arlington to preserve mature shade trees makes financial sense because trees increase your home's value and decrease your energy bill.
Maybe money doesn't grow on trees.
But it can grow with them.
Together, let's invest in trees.
Thanks. So now we need to talk about our budget. So here is a summary of our changes. Our expense budget is at 42 point.
Okay, we're getting into the groove.
That's a great way to present the budget.
All right, that's,
This year, we're doing our budget as interpretive dance. You wouldn't want to see that. So getting to our budget, our expense budget is at 42.8%, an increase of 1% from last year. Our revenue budget decreased slightly, overall remaining roughly about $10.2 million, while we increased our revenue budget by approximately $238,000 for increased program participation, which is offset by increased expense. But we also adjusted our budget, for fee reductions by approximately $260,000 for a total fee reduction budget of $960,000, which is why we have that slight decrease. You also see a staff decrease of 9.01 FTEs from the FY19 budget as a net result of some reduction options, some budget changes, and annual adjustments to our temporary staff needs in the fee-based programs. So we have a couple of key changes to our budget that I want to share. The first change adds 2 FTEs to enable an early staffing for the Longbridge Aquatics and Fitness Center. The staffing is for half year for the center's general manager and a maintenance technician. These positions will learn the facility and features as it is being constructed and also develop the procedures and staffing plans for the facility as we ramp up to the opening in FY 2021. The second change significantly increases the support DPR will provide to APS for pool operations and maintenance, and I'll get to those details later in my presentation. This budget also includes $139,000 additional funding for athletic field maintenance program, and like the pools, we'll discuss that later. And lastly, this budget includes $145,000 in new funding to allow us to keep up with the operating impacts of capital improvements. In last year's budget, only $38,000 specific for Tyrell Hills was included, but with the county manager and DMF support, we've been able to increase that amount added in FY20 to support all the capital improvements. The specific parks, I've never been able to say that word, are listed in our park management and construction line of business, but quickly include McCoy Park, Powden Skate Park, Stratford, Tuckahoe, Glencarlin Picnic Shelter, Dawson Terrace, Gunston Field, Nellie Custis, Fairlington Clay Park, Oakland, and Madison Manor Parks. And now onto our reductions. DPR has 5 reductions in the proposed budget totaling approximately $650,000. Our first reduction is the reduction in temporary support for the Community Recreation Division. DPR has a large temporary staff workforce that supports our 3 large divisions. Our overall personnel budget is approximately 70% of our DPR's budget. Of that, about 18% is related to temporary staff. In 2014, DPR did an internal review of how we utilize and manage temporary staff. Since then, the department has focused on implementing the recommendations that has enabled our Community Recreation Division to realize this reduction. Additionally, thanks to the county manager and the county board, we've converted temporary staff to permanent staff in the community recreation units, where we had both temps and perms doing similar jobs. This happened with our staff in our senior centers and preschool teachers. And the Community Recreation Division has changed in the elementary after-school program. Previously, we consolidated the after-school programs at Drew and Carver locations over to APS and reduced the budget accordingly. This year, with the Lubber Run renovation, we've consolidated the after-school program with Barrett Elementary School and will not need those temp dollars after June 2019. Our next reduction is to eliminate the program specialist position. Previously, the key responsibilities of this position were overseeing DPR's in-house transportation operations. This program has converted to an all-contract model as part of the FY19 budget, and the oversight of the contractual relationship has been transferred over to the senior adult office, as they are the key users of the contract. The remaining responsibilities are internally focused and will be absorbed by other staff in the AFS division. Next, we're reducing the facility monitor program. The facility monitors are what we call stationary staff that are assigned to one athletic field, facility, or park. Staff are charged with directing players and coaches and parents to their correct field while also working directly with the league officials and referees. Monitors are the front line of customer service to the public, often responding to inquiries regarding parks and field schedules. Field facility monitors are trained in conflict resolution and are often tasked with resolving conflicts should they arise. With the program as it is now, we have 10 to 12 people staffing the outdoor locations in the spring and fall, and 16 to 28 staff doing the winter basketball. The proposed reduction would not affect winter basketball staffing levels, but would decrease the outdoor location levels to 3 to 4 staff. The program will be eliminated for all locations except where agreements are required, the service. The remaining $52,000 will be used to continue to provide the services at the required sites, which include Greenbrier Park, Bishop O'Connell, Barcroft Park Field 6, as well as the basketball program. Notable locations that will be losing the service include Longbridge, Williamsburg, Virginia Highlands, Quincy, and Wakefield. Our roving monitor program and the park ranger program will be able to respond to the needs of the users at these sites and can include these locations on their regular patrols. This next position, a trades manager, this position is currently vacant, and the responsibilities of this position have been redistributed to the remaining 2 trades manager leaders, ones in that unit. And finally, the reduction to our supply room and lending program. The supply room part-time manager oversees, tracks, and purchases supply room inventory, manages the distribution and delivery of supplies across the county, and coordinates the identification and disposal of outdated materials. The remaining budget leaves $35,000 in non-personnel in the supply room budget to allow those supplies to continue to be purchased. And the lending budget retains $68,000, as there is only a small $5,000 non-personnel reduction. This position is internally focused, and the responsibilities will be redistributed to other staff in that unit. So we also have some revenue highlights we wanted to share with you. We continue to see increases each year in the amount that people take advantage of our fee reduction program and the resulting dollar amounts. As I mentioned earlier on, we've increased our fee reduction budget to $960,000 in FY20. With respect to our fees, as you know, we have a comprehensive fee resolution, and each year DPR staff reviews all our programs to ensure that the fees continue to align with our cost recovery goals, and we adjust our fees accordingly. We also continue to coordinate specifically on the competitive fees with those booster clubs. In this year's proposed budget, we have two key fee changes. We have an update to the personal training program fees and package offerings to ensure that all participants are paying the same rate while still maintaining full cost recovery for this program. And then specifically, the other proposals for the APS pools. The proposed budget includes several changes to provide additional support for APS for the operating and maintenance costs associated with the 3 high school pools. The current transfer of $286,988,000 will increase by approximately $110,000 in a combination of catching up with the CPI from FY 2010 and an additional adjustment based on APS operating costs. Furthermore, A new pool use fee has been proposed for all DPR aquatics programs that is estimated to generate between $130,000 and $150,000 in revenue for APS. The entirety of this fee will be collected and will be given to APS. This proposal, while different from that recommended by the Aquatics Committee Cost Recovery Work Group, is in the same spirit of their recommendation while also ensuring the same ease of accessibility is provided for the DPR aquatics program participants. In total, it will increase the support to APS from currently at $286,988,000 to estimated between $527,000 to $547,000 annually. Another change in our budget is this increase to the athletic field maintenance funding. This funding will enable us to bring back 2 weeks of mowing in the spring that was eliminated as part of the FY18 budget, increase funding to routinely add infield mix, increase to funding to additional top dressing efforts, and complete an additional targeted project each year to address deteriorating sections of the field by resodding or resprigging. For example, over the past few years, we've done projects at Quincy Park, Barcroft, Charles Stewart Park, and Nottingham Elementary. And then finally, we have some key budget considerations for us to think as we look forward. So as we've highlighted, Longbridge Aquatics and Fitness Center and park expansion will be opening. And as we've highlighted over the years, the Longbridge Park presents additional operating budget pressures that we need to address in the fiscal year 21. Annual operating impacts remain similar to the last public estimates provided, and we will probably discuss that further with Mr. Holland. Lubber Run Community Center will also be similar to Longbridge will be needed to address in FY21. While the center already has funding associated with it, the plan will be to operate at hours more closely aligned with Arlington Mill, and staffing will be needed to meet the new hours. You may have heard we're updating our public spaces master plan. And that update and hopeful adoption in April may bring upon future needs or changes that we need to discuss. And we also plan in fiscal year 20 to kick off the integrated natural resources master plan as well. We also, as CPHD shared in their work session this coming year, they anticipate a significant increase in site plans coming to the county. And DPR's planning and urban forestry staff are part of the planning process, and we will work with the county manager to ensure we are prepared to meet these development pressures. And the Lee Center has come up several times in different previous budgets. The aging center is not readily ADA accessible and needs some basic but quite costly capital investments to its aging infrastructure. So as Lubber Run opens and the DPR staff vacates 3700 South 4 Mile Run, a discussion needs to happen about the future of Lee Center, and I look forward to hopefully doing that in the coming year. So that's it for me. I look forward to answering your questions, but I think before I do, we're going to invite Paul Holland to come up.
Thank you, Ms. Rudolph, and colleagues. We're going to have Mr. Holland, due to some scheduling challenges, present some information on the Longbridge Aquatics and Fitness Center fee working group, which has been hard at work coming up with recommendations that will be considered as part of FY21 budget adoption for fees at Longbridge Park. But since we do have staffing requests that are associated with this for this year's budget, as well as some conversation in the media about it, we figured it was a good time to have everybody check in and get acclimated to the work of Mr. Holland's group. Take it away, Paul.
Thank you, Chairman Dorsey and members of the board. Just going to talk through these slides and happy to answer any questions that you all have at the end. Just so as an introduction, just to frame it here, we were appointed by the LB PAC in April 2018 to develop the fee package for the new facility. I was appointed vice chair, and we had 11 members representing a variety of the stakeholder groups involved, from the Park and Rec Commission, the LB PAC, Senior Adult Council, Sports Commission, Aquatics Committee. The Crystal City bid was involved, as was APS. For our charge, we were really focused on 4 main objectives here, looking at membership and passes and proposed uses in accordance with existing DPR policies and fee policies, recommending membership durations and kind of trying to think how we would apply those to the new facility, working on reciprocity with Arlington Public Schools, and the Longbridge Park, or Longbridge Center. And finally, think about reciprocity between existing DPR programs, including the senior adult program. As far as community engagement, really would like to commend the staff for their efforts here. I think we had some really robust community engagement. We had 3 different surveys that went out to the community, a statistically valid survey that received 824 responses, the business community survey, which received just under 100, and then a web-based survey, which got over 1,000, which I think is pretty extraordinary for this type of survey. So really pleased to have that community engagement, and we got a lot of good feedback that helped guide our recommendations through that engagement process. As far as benchmarking goes, one of our tasks, or under the charge, was to look at other facilities with similar amenities within the region, and those are a list of what the staff presented us with as benchmarks. And here are the recommendations. This is a bit of an eye chart, but it gives you a sense of where we are. I think in particular, with 2 young kids, I think the family daily of 25 is particularly appealing. I just went to the movies, and it's like almost twice that to go to the movies. So, to go on a cold day and have a water park is very appealing. So, a lot of detail there. $630 is the annual adult price, and then there's a 25% premium for non-resident daily passes and a 30% premium for the longer non-resident memberships. So
Mr. Holland, before we leave that slide, there's the curious omission of a family annual. Something you can speak to now or planning to later?
So there's a lot of kind of complicated things there. I mean, I think.
Why don't I let you then go do your presentation and we can address that with questions? Thank you.
Yeah, and I think staff can help me out there as well. So major findings and recommendations. I think this is a really key point that want to make sure we're reevaluating this 18 to 24 months after the beginning of operations. I think while we had some good benchmarking, while we had the previous surveys that were done for the facility to guide us, a thorough and comprehensive review will really hopefully set the facility up for long-term fiscal success. Reciprocity review, frankly, we kind of punted on that issue, waiting for some other reviews of reciprocity and other items to get resolved. And matinee pass implementation, we needed to identify times to offer matinee pass, but looking at the utilization, understanding kind of where perhaps the utilization could use a boost, and using that matinee option to do so. So as far as next steps, conclusion, just a little bit there on the outreach that we did with some of the stakeholder groups. We had a presentation at the end of January to the OBPAC, and here we are with the staff bringing the recommendations forward, that'll be next year as part of the budget process, but here's the first step in doing that. So happy to answer questions that you all may have.
All right, terrific. While we have Mr. Holland available, do we want to have a few questions for him? And then we'll get to the larger DPR presentation after that. Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, I'll let you pursue the question he was having a hard time answering on the family pass, but I'll be careful. I'll tiptoe around that one, but I'm sure we'll get to it. I was just wondering on the, and I'm sure that, just talk to me a little bit about the reasoning on the premium for non-residents, why you picked 25 and 30%. Is that usually what happened? I mean, I just wondered what the context for that was, because there must be a reason.
There was, there's certainly a desire amongst the members of the working group to have a level of kind of increase for non-residents.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. My question is why that, did you just?
I mean, I think there's a balance, and we felt that was the right balance. Kind of looking at some other of the benchmarking data and using that as our guide, we thought, too much above would discourage perhaps some folks maybe coming over from the district or folks working at the Pentagon from using the facility. And based on the benchmarking, felt that that was the appropriate.
And is that kind of Weston, because I assume Fairfax County does this, I know Alexandria does, I mean, that's just kind of the going rate?
It was within the ballpark of
Okay.
good.
All right.
And I think it falls within, it's similar to what some of the other,
Yeah,
some of
that
the
was
other
my question.
jurisdictions.
I mean, I'm assuming it was, I was just kind of asking. Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, thanks.
So if we could go to Mr. DeFerranti while I give people time to address the family question.
Thank you, kind on both sides. So, did you ever have any conversation about whether, if there was a large rush of individuals, what if during the day a ton of folks are coming because there's, whether the District of Columbia parks are coming, but what if there's a huge rush and you're outside of kind of what you anticipated? Or did you think about that in the 18 to 24 months delay and say, we really don't want to mess with this, but I could just envision unanticipated outside of what you might expect usage? Is there any sort of valve that you would, or a situation where you would say, oh, we got to adjust this?
So, I mean, we kind of used what was out there. I mean, I think looking at some of the survey data, it shows that we specifically asked, well, what time do you anticipate using the facility? And so, obviously, the times you would expect were the most popular in the morning and in the evening. Obviously, that may not be accurate. We may not be reaching it's a statistically valid survey, but, things can happen, and that could change. But I think, we looked at it, and I think giving the flexibility of having the matinee option allows us to maybe bump up some usage during times that don't end up being as popular.
Great.
So,
Also, I mean, one, should we be so lucky? And two, the board does look at the fees readopts our fees every year as part of the fee schedule. So should we feel that we need to make adjustments, that's partially why we have that sort of time to look at it. But we can also, even after year one, come back and say, we have lots of flexibility. This gives us a lot of flexibility with all these different options. And then I think we have the flexibility, obviously, as part of the annual budget process and fee adoption to look at and decide, do we need to make an adjustment?
Great. And the other question, I think, maybe the chair, you talked about some of the facilities further outside of the county. Did you, in the course of your working group, did you kind of do a little bit of, in addition to the ones listed in your presentation, did you do a little bit of thinking about across the river in DC where folks might come from or where there are other facilities at any point? Did you have that sort of conversation or not in that level of detail?
I mean, we certainly thought about it. I mean, DC, looking at a pool, like DC doesn't charge its residents to use its pool. So, they provide 100% fee support, and there are other models in the region. I think that creates some interesting dynamics with who might come over to use it. I think certainly speaking for myself, would anticipate the working population in Crystal City and at the Pentagon
Sure.
Utilizing this. Pentagon, I know, having worked there, has an exercise facility, but I think it's pretty packed. So.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Gutschall?
Thank you. Sort of a follow-up to that, I think maybe to that last question. And you mentioned that somebody in the region has full cost recovery.
DC.
But yeah, so I just wanted to understand. These are obviously not cost recovery.
I'm sorry. I misinterpreted your question. DC doesn't charge anybody, so
they have
it's fully subsidized for DC.
That's the opposite of that. Okay. So, but could you just share with me the methodology that you guys use, or was there any attention paid to cost recovery, or this was sort of more of an exercise of what we think people are willing to pay, more or less, or somewhere in between there?
So we had the B&D survey from 2013, which was certainly one of the guiding markers that we used, which talked about the operations or projected operations of the facility at that time. And these recommendations are fairly in line. I mean, they're not exactly in line with that, but they're fairly in line. And, there will be some taxpayer support needed to operate this facility. But, I think what we are recommending is in line with what the staff has previously presented to the board.
Okay, well then maybe I'll turn it over to staff.
If I could add to that, so DPR's existing cost recovery philosophy recovers direct costs of our programs. That's how DPR's fees operate. So if you participate in a swim class for DPR, your fee covers the cost of the instructor and any other direct costs, kickboards, floaties, supplies, et cetera. So DPR does not have any fees that are set to recover the costs of buildings or the facility in which the program operates. So while this group looked at DPR's cost recovery philosophy, we also relied heavily on benchmarking and survey responses to help round out when you're charging a membership fee for a facility, what level is appropriate for the fee. So
if you just want to use the pool though and you're not taking a class, so you're not, it's not cost recovery for the instructor or anything like that. You are recovering in some form or another the cost of the facility itself.
So by charging day passes and membership fees, you are helping to reduce the net tax support of the facility.
Got it. And is there, and this might be going back to the work group, Mr. Holland, was there any discussion of a needs-based fee structure, a reduced fee for lower income, for kids, for otherwise?
So DPR's existing fee reduction policy will apply to all of these fees.
So existing policies for that, right. All right, thank you.
All right, so we've tiptoed around it. So how about we go into some specific questions about family annual, and then I have a few other categories.
Sure. So it's an excellent question, one that the group talked about a lot. And while you'll see there is the family day pass, the group struggled with how to define a family. Is it 2 adults and 2 kids? Is it 2 adults and 5 kids? We looked at benchmarking. Fairfax, it is 2 adults and is it up to 10? 8 kids. There are others. So it's who is a family. So it became more of an operational conversation. So we have time to continue to look at that if an annual family pass is something that the board feels strongly about offering.
Okay. And how about speaking to a scenario raised by Mr. DeFerranti earlier, what about group passes? So you have, a tour group coming in to town, they want to take their folks to the pool, want a break on bringing 20 people at one time, or a birthday party or something else,
Those are the fees that we also are going to be looking towards bringing back to you in next year's budget as part of this. We really needed to first, because a lot of our fees are built off of that adult daily pass, and then everything kind of builds from that. And so when we come next year, we're going to have the room rentals, the birthday parties, and we're going to look to see potentially about those kind of ideas as group rates as well.
Okay. And so speaking to, this being a new facility and, there may be people who want to support it to a higher level than just simply fees that we charge, to get maybe have a wall of contributors or some other kind of honorific. Have we given a thought to lifetime passes or, other forms of non-traditional based on, daily frequency or annual use?
I believe that wasn't the work of this group, but I appreciate that kind of thinking, and we should definitely look into it and bring it back as part of our discussion over this coming year in anticipation of the full adoption next year.
Terrific. And then the final one, based on Mr. Gutschall's questioning, and I'm glad to know that the existing policy for fee reductions is in place. How does that actually work? So if, what would a family need to do to take advantage of that?
So it's income-based, and it's tied to the Section 8 income levels. And so based on the size of your family and the income, you can have 25, 50, or 75% fee reductions. It's a simple one-page form, and you fill it out with our registration office down at 3700. You can also fill it out at some of our other community centers that have administrative staff there. And once approved, your fee reduction is good for a year, and then you just renew it each year, and we proactively reach out to our customers prior to that year expiration to remind them to re-up.
Thank you. And I would encourage maybe a look at maybe something not quite at the fee reduction level, but more the fee smoothing level. We're clearly providing a benefit for people who can front load a lot of visits. They get a lower per visit cost, which may disadvantage families who are not able to front a significant amount of money, but would still like to enjoy the savings that come from frequency. So do people have the ability to, pay for a 10-visit pass, but do 2 easy payments in order to make it happen?
It's a great suggestion. Something we instituted a couple years ago with summer camps was we now offer split payments so that you only have to pay 50% at the time of registration to address concerns like that. And we do offer payment plans individualized based on customers reaching out to us and letting us know what their needs are.
Okay, I would encourage us to think maybe about something a little bit more formal, because, one of the things that this certainly all makes sense, but, as we take a spotlight on it, we recognize that people who can front the money receive the benefit, and people who may be a little less able to put that much up front suffer from a higher per unit cost.
Absolutely. And I'll add, we do offer installment billing for some of our long-term programs like preschool, so they pay each month rather than all 10 months at one time, so we can certainly look at that.
Terrific. Any other questions about this? All right, it's exciting. Oops, Mr. DeFerranti.
You asked a line of questioning that I'm interested in, and I think it's really important to make sure with fee reduction that the mechanics of how that works. I'm glad you asked about that, Mr. Dorsey, Chair. But as many different locations as can have the ability to accept folks who need fee relief, that would be important. And I just don't know if you go in and you get checked in, but then you would go to, is there a separate office where you would pick up that form, or how does that work? Because certainly you wouldn't always want to, you might want to be discreet about how you do that.
Sure. So we advertise, we share through our various public relations materials where and how you can apply for a fee. And so our front desk staff at each center that handles that paperwork are educated and trained on how to handle it, and I hear you, discreetly. So it's not something that's handled, right there while people are walking in, and so you're taken to a private place to handle your paperwork. And, it's an easy process. It's really, documenting that you are a resident of Arlington, because fee reductions are obviously only extended to residents. But yes, we've been offering fee reductions for many years, and it's a streamlined process.
And it's growing because the amount is growing because folks are more comfortable. Is that why? The overall?
It's a variety of things. We actually are increasing our outreach efforts because we believe that there are a lot more individuals that are eligible for fee reductions, and so we've been looking at why aren't they? Are they just not interested in parks and recreation programs, or is it that they're interested but they're unsure of this option for them? So we hope to grow it. We extended almost $960,000 in fee reductions in FY18, and we've seen it steadily grow year over year, so we continue to do more outreach.
Great, thanks. It's just really important that folks have access.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Mr. Holland. Hope you can make your next appointment. All right. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you. All right. So, did you conclude yours, or did you just take a break? Okay, you concluded. All right. So we'll go to some questions for Ms. Rudolph for her base presentation before we invite several commissions to join us with their comments, and we'll engage in some questioning with them. So any initial questions for Ms. Rudolph before we engage the commissioners? Ms. Garvey.
Maybe almost more of a comment. I was delighted to hear the change in name for the congregate senior, and you can see the bump in numbers. So maybe in here we can call it something different too, because it's in the pages that we've got, it's still called congregate. So, and then could you talk to me a little bit about the therapeutic recreation camps, because it looks like those are doing really well. Some years ago, before you came, there was an effort to cut those, and I got really upset about it, and because I think they're so important for people. So it looks like those are also increasing a little bit, the therapeutic camps that we're doing.
Right, so participation in our therapeutic recreation camps and programs, as I said earlier, have been growing consistently. And one area that we've seen also increase is not just in the camps themselves, but in our inclusion programs. So this is opportunities for people with some disability to be able to participate in our other programs as well. And so we've seen increases in there. We've definitely seen increases, particularly in the adaptive swimming and adaptive programs at Barcroft as well. So overall, I think we've got a really great team who's overseeing our therapeutic recreation program. Actually, Mr. Gutschall just gave them an award just last week as part of this month's People with Disabilities celebration. And so I think the program is very well known. And so I think people feel comfortable having their children and adults in those programs.
No, that's great. And it looks like you're making a pretty big effort, which is great, to reach out to people who could, the disability community, and you've got the folks that could qualify for, support in the fees, and those continue to go up. Do you want to talk just a little bit about how you do that outreach, and how many people you think we're still not reaching?
So I do feel we do outreach by connecting with some of our affordable housing partners. We more recently have placed staff inside our centers, so some of the registration staff there at Arlington Mill and a couple other locations as well, so that you don't always have to go down to 3,700. And so we're trying to do more outreach that way. I have to say, though, I've always felt that, like, while our folks who are getting fee reductions are increasing every year, I don't think the number is actually that high. If you really look at it, and if you look at the numbers that I think DHS has provided over the years of people who are near at the poverty line, it's a much larger number. So we continue to feel like we could be doing a better effort at it, to be honest. Cheryl Johnson, I've asked her to help work on that with some other folks in our department, and Pete Lusk, to work on outreach more, because I do feel like there's ways for us to get more people into our programs, to be honest. I also think it's some of those programs, and I've also recently been talking with Kurt Lewis about how do we get more people into nature programs as well, because I think that there's a whole variety of what we're doing that I feel like we could do a better job of getting a more diverse population into.
That's great. And do you partner with the schools in some of those efforts? I would think that would be a way of doing that too.
We do partner with schools, and you see like some of our programs on there, like Peach Jars, and they're those kinds of things that we do. And then we have certain programs that are really actually within schools. I always think that there's more we could probably do with schools, because we're all just kind of running around. But I do think there are ways for us to probably even partner more with them.
Yeah, I'm just guessing that the outreach, they might know of more folks that could take advantage that are not, just through the children that they serve.
Yeah, we do a lot of work like with specific schools, and we find that's the best way for us to work, where our people in our recreation programs have direct relationships with a principal or somebody in a school, particularly at the elementary level. We do a lot of collaboration there. And then we obviously continue to do a lot of collaboration with them on the facility sides of things.
Well, that's great. I really appreciate all the efforts that you're making, and I'll look forward to another bump up next year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Gutschall.
Thank you. You referenced in your presentation the updated personal training fees, and actually had 3 separate individuals come into Open Door Monday just last night to ask about this. So I wanted to ask on their behalf a couple of questions. But can you tell me, first off, is this under the classes, sports, and camp programs, or what program does the personal training come under?
So it's technically considered one of our supplemental programs,
Okay.
which is the 100% cost recovery or more. And personal training actually lands at the top of our pyramid, which is 100% plus market rate.
Which is,
If I could just add, that's the top of our pyramid is for highly individualized programs, which do not provide a benefit to the greater public. So it's one-on-one, so it's 100% plus.
sure. And that was actually the gist of some of their questions was, first off, there was a little bit, and I couldn't gather exactly, I know there's a rate increase that is proposed, right? That's what they reported to me. And that reducing from 13 sessions to 12 sessions. So was there a rhyme or reason to reducing from 13 to 12, or was that just part of a restructuring of the rate?
So the 13 to 12, it had been several years since we had benchmarked and reviewed the program. So in looking at updated data, we restructured to the 12 packages. We offer, clients can split the payments, getting back to one of Mr. Dorsey's earlier comments about not having to pay everything up front. So Part of it was dividing 13 in half, it just gets a little messy. So 12 is easier to split, 6 and 6, so you have your half payments. And overall, with respect to the fee change, we realigned the fee to update it to ensure that all participants, we have a little over 100 participants that have been part of the program for many years, to ensure that everyone's rate is consistent across the board.
Yeah, so that was the other thing, is they discovered in the course of this discussion that they were paying different rates previously. That's just an artifact of some prior policy, or that was?
Correct. So fees have not changed for many years. So actually, some folks who are participants in the program, their fee is actually decreasing, because we're trying to smooth out the fees and just have everybody participate at the same rate, while still enabling us to have full cost recovery to pay for the program as well.
Right, so this wasn't a fee reduction thing. This was not part of the, they didn't have different rates because some people were
No.
participating in the fee reduction program.
It was
They
a
did rates based on the time that they joined, and now we're getting everybody on the same page. 12 sessions, because it's easier to divide by 2. And the last point was concern that you're also eliminating a position that helps to coordinate the scheduling and all that. Is that true? Are you eliminating any positions related to that program?
So one of those positions is currently vacant, as the person took a position over at DHS, but that position is not slated to be eliminated.
Okay, so there are no personnel reductions related to the personal training program or administration?
No.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Garvey.
Yeah. And I assume that difference in the fees, this is not the question I was going to ask, but I assume that difference in fees is still a hangover from the way we've been doing things from the mists of early time, that's how it kind of got.
Correct.
Yes. So I've enjoyed watching Ms. Rudolph. I thought you'd sort of finished kind of getting everything kind of on a good even keel, but you're still at it. Thank you. It's a long process. So we've been meeting with the Northern Virginia Conservation Trust folks, and I can't find where in here they're concerned about a cut of a position, I think, that we're doing. Or is that not part of this budget? Is that something else? I mean, if this is not the time to talk about it, but I couldn't find the page about it because I just learned about it recently.
Sure, that is in the county manager's narrative section. It's in that option list, should when the county manager provided various options for the board, should a tax rate not be taken. There was a number of different cuts associated with that, and VCT's cut was on that list.
So that's for options for additional reductions, should the board desire.
And not my recommendation, but food for thought in case you didn't want to increase the rate.
So that should make some people in the room very happy to hear. Thank you. Bless you.
All right, I'll ask one more before we invite our commissioners up. This has been a unique and wholly entertaining work session.
It's Parks and Rec.
I know, right? And they didn't even have to give us anything. So, Ms. Rudolph, you earlier were going through the list of items that are scheduled to get enhancements through our maintenance budget. And just at a look of the parks that you identified, while it's not exclusive of everything that you may address in the year, just want to point out and hopefully get reassurance that we take a more holistic and countywide approach to ensuring improvements and maintenance at park facilities. Just a quick look at it shows that 78% of the funding is actually going to North Arlington facilities, 22% to South Arlington. I imagine that varies from year to year. I just want some assurances that we take a broad look at this to ensure that there's equity across years and across facilities.
Yes, so we should definitely tie that both to this and as well to our capital improvement plan, as well as these projects directly correlate to funding in the CIP. So it seems like a good place for us to track it both here, but also track it as we do look forward to the next CIP, which will be starting in the next fiscal year.
And the bond funding that's associated with that, because that tends to be where the big dollars are, not just, right, on PAYGO, it's bonds, the bond funded projects.
So hopefully at some point we'll be able to robustly be able to analyze that and report that to the community so that they can ensure that we have an equitable approach to the investments that we make. All right, now, Ms. Garvey.
Are we finishing up? Because I have one more.
Well, we're just finishing up with Mr. Rudolph. We still have 4 commissions and commissioners who are going to join us to provide some comment.
All right, I'll wait till after that.
Okay,
That's fine.
thank you.
Thank you.
So without further ado, I'd like to invite Phil Klingelhofer, Bill Ross, Shirley Brothwell, and Cynthia Hilton to the front. Not all of you can sit here at the same time, so whoever gets here first can get the microphone first. All right, so Mr. Klingelhofer, your microphone is on first, so you get the honors.
I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Urban Forestry Commission on the proposed FY20 budget. And we are pleased to note that the county manager has recognized the importance of trees and nature for the Arlington community by showing continued support for tree planting and maintenance and for invasive species removal in the proposed budget. These programs are having a significant beneficial impact on Arlington. There are 2 areas in the county manager's options for additional program reductions for fiscal year 20 that we are strongly concerned about. The optional cuts to the conservation and interpretation section, which includes the nature centers and park rangers, would reduce nature center staffing by 2.2 FTEs and significantly reduce hours at the nature centers to be open only 4 days per week. In the past budget cycles, there have already been significant cuts to conservation and interpretation. In fiscal year 10 and 11, cuts of more than 30% to nature center staff and hours resulted in significant reductions of staff, programming with and staff hours and office hours, sorry. There was a partial rollback later due to public intensive pushback to these cuts, but we're concerned about them. A significant problem with the severe reduction in staff is that minimal staffing permits little more than just keeping the buildings open with diminished capacity for programming or supporting volunteers. At the same time, there is a high demand for nature centers and programming. In 2016, nature centers were ranked the first most important priority in the statistically valid survey conducted in preparation for the update of the Public Spaces Master Plan. In fiscal year 18, visitors to both nature centers totaled 21,092, and an additional 18,307 participated in nature programs. So a staff reduction would also send a terrible message that these things don't matter in Arlington. Lastly, nature centers and staff leverage significant volunteer service. The combined volunteer hours for both nature centers was 3,100 hours in fiscal year 18. And that figure does not include all the work provided by the master naturalists who give over 15,000 hours of volunteer service annually to our community. And cutbacks in nature center hours and reductions in staffing will negatively impact those volunteer service hours, probably disproportionately because staff will need to focus on simply running the facilities, caring for exhibits, and relating to visitors. Another Tier 2 recommendation is that we're concerned about is to eliminate the urban design team. I know that's not part of this budget hearing, but this is my only chance to speak to it. And the question is, what was the thinking here? Look at the Planning Commission calendar, more projects than ever, and that doesn't count Amazon. Planning Commission members have also noted that they often rely on the expertise of the urban design team to provide guidance during the planning process. So do we really want Arlington to look like Route 1 south of the Beltway? We need this function more than ever. This elimination could significantly hamper our utilization of the principles of biophilic communities for planning and development, incorporating nature into our planning efforts to maintain the quality of life in an increasingly urban community, since the urban design team would be the logical place to initiate these efforts. So that's, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Klingelhofer. And I think most of the thrust of your concerns and good advice and good guidance for our consideration will only be activated should the board choose the optional, the additional budget options that were provided by the manager, but are 2, like the previous item, not a part of the base budget. Just want to make sure.
That's absolutely correct.
Okay.
We're actually pleased with the proposed budget and
Terrific.
what it maintains for our native, natural community.
All right, and for anybody who's listening, trust me, Mr. Klingelhofer was not dissing the Richmond Highway area of Alexandria with his comments, just speaking broadly in a descriptive way. So I got to keep the peace, Phil. I got to keep the peace. All right, Mr. Ross from the from the Park and Recreation Commission.
Great, thank you very much. I just wanted to say that we support the budget changes proposed for 2020, and seems to be a continuation of progress we've been making over the last few years in terms of enhancing efficiencies and reducing redundancies, and while downgrading or eliminating programs that are no longer demanded by the community. We support the tax increases that preserve current DPR and other departments' programs. The list of projects that are supported by the pay-go funding appears to be in line with our priorities that we've been following. One thing we really support is the addition of funds to enhance the fields and other facilities. This seems to be following our commission's perennial advice and guidance to keep our county's facilities in a state of good repair. And Ms. Brothwell, I think, will do a much more thorough job talking about it, but we have discussed the future possible use of the field fund to be used for maintenance, as opposed to what I think some of us had understood originally. The field fund was supposed to be, at least in part, used for maintenance as opposed to renovations and just adding in new amenities. The proposed fee structure changes that Ms. Rudolph talked about appears to be reasonably, and notably the changes in the aquatics program funding fees. I know that there's some view that this is a first step in making some changes here, but the changes appear to make up for some of the non-inflation adjusted transfers we've had over quite a few years. And it also begins to change the DPR swimming class, to charge DPR and swimming class users to help fund overhead and maintenance costs of running our pools. And we haven't had those embedded in the fees before. Again, and Mr. Dorsey, I'm going to now talk for a second about the optional second tier of cuts. And what Mr. Klingelhofer said, I have nothing to add in terms of concerns over the nature centers. We perfectly match and would follow the concerns that have been expressed by urban forestry in that area from the Park and Recreation Commission point of view. The second thing we have a certain amount of concern about, and we haven't thoroughly discussed it within the commission, but about the proposed elimination of the urban agriculture program. And I think we consider that although DPR proposes that many or most of these functions could be handled elsewhere by doing some shifting around and using other people, we really worry about the loss of a function which supports our community's enjoyment of its public spaces, and including community gardens and the farmers markets. And we'd like to, there's also support for the liaison to the extension program, but in following the mission that was provided by Ms. Rudolph, talking about the wellness and the vitality of our community. We think that these are a couple programs, just the principle of kind of taking away this as a fundamental function of what DPR does. That's a bit of a concern of ours. And we think that a lot of dynamic communities are really shifting to this area, whether it's these types of programs or rooftop gardening and things like that are really important. And then just moving forward, I just wanted to emphasize some of the areas that are listed in the Public Space Master Plan document. We look forward to programs and budgets that work toward a balance between casual and programmed uses. This can involve focusing on areas of the parks not just used for programmed activities, but may involve carrying out certain possible micro investments in our parks, such as benches, tables, and natural plantings, that type of thing. And we support the ongoing and future DPR efforts to improve data collection of our field inventory and field utilization, and work on efforts to improve the processes for allocating our fields and other DPR provided amenities. And finally, I want to mention Ms. Rudolph had talked about some future budget challenges that we have, whether it's Longbridge, Leber Run, implementation of the Public Space Master Plan or the Integrated Resources Plan, and we're cognizant of those budget challenges there. One thing I just wanted to say was about the Lee Center, that yes, we have to deal with it. And on this, we would just hope that the discussion over its future may be considered as one of the partly the work of the Lee Highway Planning Group. We think that would be really important. That's all I had to say. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ross. We very much appreciate it. Don't go too far. We're going to have Ms. Hilton and Ms. Brothwell come up to the front. And Ms. Brothwell, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and begin.
Well,
Chair of our Sports Commission, Shirley Brothwell.
Bill Ross is always a tough act to follow. He's so great at coming in and speaking to you guys. I have no prepared remarks, so you're going to have to bear with me while I wing it a little bit. The commission got an update from DPR on the budget last month. We are broadly pleased with the way that the DPR budget has come together. Like the Park and Rec Commission, we're comfortable with the tax increase. We recognize that to have the community that we want, it's getting more expensive. We're probably going to have to, it's a trade-off between paying more or cutting more, and I think that the proposed increases are reasonable given where we are financially. We're okay with particular elements that are relevant for sports. For example, the elimination of the permanent facility monitors canvassed a few people who might be affected by that, and I got sort of a shrug of the shoulders, sort of like, yeah, we'll just call the rover. So I think that's a pretty decent option. And of course, DPR is always careful to look at eliminating empty positions where possible. So, we don't pretend to delve into all of how Ms. Rudolph manages her department. We trust her to do a good job, and I think she makes wise choices in that regard. We're also good with the various fee proposals that relate to sports in the budget. I'll come into one of them in a little bit more detail, but the personal fitness fee increases seemed reasonable to us. The adjustments to the aquatic team fees, as you know, that's developed jointly with DPR and the booster clubs through a process that was established a couple of years ago. I checked in with the aquatics team booster club manager. She said they were happy with how that process went, so I don't have any concerns about that. We are very, very happy to see the additional money being put in to the budget for increased maintenance. I think that's something that we have been asking for along with Park and Rec for quite some time. And that's very, very welcome. And then the proposal that's in the budget for increasing the county's transfer to APS for the pool strikes us as a pretty reasonable way to go in terms of catching up with CPI, and then finding a way to assess a moderate fee to class users for their time in the facility. It's very analogous to the field fee that Bill Ross mentioned previously. So we're supportive with where that came out, and we know that's bit. And I know Ms. Hilton is going to has her own comments about that, but the Sports Commission is comfortable with where that came out. That issue, though, in particular, raised for us some questions about the philosophies that underlie our fees in general in Arlington as they relate to the sports world, and what are we trying to accomplish with those fees. So we have a model in the cost recovery model where DPR is recovering, depending upon the social value of the scale, some overhead and employee costs or teacher costs. And then the field fee was somewhat of an arbitrary number. And now we have the pool fee, which is, again, a somewhat arbitrary number. And I think the question becomes how much of the maintenance of a facility should be borne by the users of that facility versus the general tax base. It's obviously, a fundamental philosophical fiscal policy question. I am no expert in that. But I think it would be good if we had a kind of a unifying philosophy across our different amenities moving forward so that we understood where are we trying to recover some portion of the cost from the user, where are we trying to, or is it appropriate to place all of the cost on the tax base, and where are we kind of splitting the difference. On the field fee in particular, it's kind of, again, an amalgam of the two. It's money that's theoretically collected for maintenance of the fields, but it's put aside to fund sort of improvement projects, small scale, large scale, depending upon which part of the fund you're taking funds out of. And the more I look at that fee, and I'm sure that the user groups, won't thank me for this, but the more that I look at that fee, the more that I feel like that really ought to be money that goes back into a maintenance fund, and pooled together so that our maintenance dollars are larger than they are right now. I've socialized this with a few people, and I think their immediate reaction has been, well, how are those decisions going to get made? What role would we have in trying to help give input into, where those dollars should be directed? So I think there's probably more work to be done there, but that's something that I would leave you with, probably not for this budget, but maybe for a subsequent budget in the out years. So that's all I've got.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brothwell. And Ms. Hilton.
Okay, well, I apologize to you all because this is my first chance at this, so too much of my, government experience. So I have some formal written comments.
Paper is good, but we do need you to wait to speak until you're in front of a microphone, just because you won't be heard.
I get this in case because, I'm trying to keep with your time thing, and there's a lot of detail. It's hard to cover in the whatever.
Microphone,
Okay.
there we go. Thank you.
So, don't I have to push something here?
You're good.
Okay. Last budget cycle, the Aquatics Committee brought you concerns about the recovery of pool operating and maintenance or O&M costs that unfairly favored one group of county pool users over another, and that relied on education tax dollars to support the county's use of the pools. This year, we brought you a framework on how to equitably solve those problems in a way that is fair to all users, simple for patrons to understand, repeatable for staff to implement, and transparent and accountable for the public. No other plan has been presented that claims these outcomes. As a refresher, the county has become the dominant user of the pools, accounting for 72% of admissions. The county's two user groups include DPR class team registrants, who account for 57% of these admissions and pay no O&M user fees, while drop-in swimmers, who account for the remaining admissions, pay fees covering 91% of their costs. 70% of the cost support to cover the county's O&M costs is funded by APS. The manager's budget proposal has begun to address these two policy issues, but comes short, so sorry, but thank you for trying. Anyway, APS is still paying the majority of these costs for the county's use of the pools, and the county's DPR users are not charged their fair share of remaining O&M costs. As you consider the merits of these proposals and ask why the committee's framework was not implemented, my written statements pose some policy questions to aid your deliberations, so let me mention just a few. Why is APS being asked to use its education dollars to provide over half the tax support needed to sustain this county program? And that's relevant in that we're talking about raising the tax fee a cent or maybe two to help APS because of their burgeoning concerns or needs. What is the rationale for turning the DPR cost recovery pyramid on its head, where drop-in participants are to pay no more than 30% of attributed costs, and those receiving more mostly individual benefit, this was mentioned earlier, such as an instructor or coach benefit enjoyed by DPR registrants, are to pay between 30 and 100%. What is the county's rationale for perpetuating the disparity between the O&M fees charged its two user groups? If, as we understand, the plan is to turn over all services provided at the schools to APS when the Longbridge Aquatic Center opens, why is the county tasking DPR to devote resources to track, transfer, and be held accountable for a small temporary O&M fee collection program rather than just using APS's existing program? The committee's framework demonstrates that the relative ease with which fee rates and tax support can be transparently adjusted with full accountability. The county can choose where on a scale of 0 to 100 to set the level of fee-based cost recovery. The tax reduction opportunities are infinite. In terms of potential savings from program efficiencies, let APS collect all O&M fees. It's a task they have performed for decades. The disparity in how the county treats its two user groups when it comes to O&M fees should end. Fairness can be achieved by setting one fee schedule for both groups or by charging no user fees, an option long practice for DPR registrants. The framework addresses your needs for cost reductions and program efficiencies and corrects an institutionalized pattern of discriminatory treatment among the county's two pool user groups. We urge your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hilton. So this framework that you've offered is a substantial conversation, probably beyond the scope of our work session today to get a full conclusive conversation, but I think it's very appropriate at this time that we have any questions, any technical questions on what you've presented, as well as any other questions or comments on the guidance and advice and perspectives offered by Ms. Brothwell, Mr. Ross, and Mr. Klingelhofer. So that's all in order at this time. Colleagues? Good? Mr. DeFerranti.
I don't know if there's a history to this, but certainly the three of you as liaison with each of you, I think I've got the more diligent chairs than the rest of you, humbly and respectfully. No. I'm saying just a big thank you to the three of you for how diligently and how thoroughly you work. I've been to each of your sessions and I've been really impressed. That's sort of the big picture thought. I do, with respect to, I appreciate the thoroughness of your analysis, Ms. Hilton, and I do think that this is a big subject, and I do feel as though, at least as a start, I think you might agree that this is better than where we stood last year. So, I appreciate your patience as you work through this, and certainly I've been receiving the emails that folks have been sending. But that's sort of my take at this time. I'm sure we'll have more discussion over the coming months on this subject.
Can I make one comment, which is if you look at the percentage that DPR was paying the transfers, what they call the transfer amount, back in FY10, that percentage, which I'm sorry, I forgot, anyway, was more than even with these increases that are proposed with cost of living. So even with the increases, even with that tax support increase for the transfer, you still would be paying proportionally less than you were back in 2010. So and we're still asking, APS to pay the majority of this, and we're still having 2 fee structures going forward. It really is, it doesn't have a good optic. I will just say that.
Sure. The only other thing I would note, Ms. Garvey mentioned it, is just that the cuts to urban agriculture, the cuts that Mr. Ross mentioned in Tier 2, those are not, you mentioned they're not in the base budget. At least my view is that we shouldn't be pursuing those cuts. I think that the manager's recommendation, at least, is a good starting place.
Okay. Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to thank Ms. Hilton, too, for her passion on this issue. You came in and spent a lot of time with me. Thank you. I actually think it dovetails, what you brought up dovetails with what Ms. Brothwell talked about, the whole overall policy. And it sounds like we are going to be really tackling fees in this next coming year and probably addressing all of these. So I think our chair is right that it requires more conversation at a more in-depth format than we have here and now, but really do thank you for coming forward and pointing it out very clearly. I must say that the number of things that have come forward about people being upset what were in potential cuts but aren't there makes me just really happy that the budget situation is as good as it is, and because it was looking pretty bad for a while. So that's great. When everybody's coming and mostly concerned about cuts that we might possibly take above and beyond, I think we're in a good place. Thank you. I don't think we'll have to take any of those, I hope. I did have a question about mowing, though, because I saw we were increasing mowing for fields. Great. I'm assuming some of that is because when we get a whole lot of rain, which we have been getting lately, and it looks like we will, I assume the grass grows faster and we need to do that. My question is, I'm assuming if for some chance we actually ended up in a drought situation where the grass wasn't growing as fast, then would you cut back? I mean, do you have flexibility, or is it like a contract where they mow no matter what, which I've seen sometimes, you get an annual contract, and whether that grass needs mowing or not, it gets mowed. Hey, Kurt, how are you?
Yes, it is a contract where we're obligated to whatever we set up, we're going to have to pay. So if in times of drought, they don't cut, but they also go out and pick up debris, trash, and things like that over the mowing site. So there still is a responsibility. They may not mow. Oftentimes, they do run over what doesn't really need to be cut. but they do pick up trash and other things, sticks and
Okay.
things like that.
All right, I'll go with that. I know with contracts, it could be difficult. If we end up with real variability, we might want to look at it, but it looks like we're just in for becoming like Ireland anyway, so that's okay. And then I had another question. I'm looking for my piece of paper. Oh, yeah, here we go. So I have been keeping Ms. Rudolph and staff in my office ever since it came out, like 3 years ago, this nice map showing all the parks in Arlington and how almost anywhere you are, you can walk to a park. It's really good. It was put out by the Connection. They used our data, but it's just really a cool map that kind of makes a point when people start getting, I know people want more parks, I understand that, but we really do pretty well. And I've been keeping our, the news release in May of 16, so that's again about 3 years ago, but where we were ranked 4th among the 100 largest cities where the Trust for Public Land in our park quality, which is really cool, and I assume we're still there. One of the things that they cited was that 98% of residents can walk to a park in 10 minutes or less. So my question to you is, do we kind of update that number? I'm assuming because the parks don't move and we do continue to get more people, does that percentage still pretty much hold?
So actually, in 2018, we were ranked number 4 again, and those numbers still held there. And that's actually a lot of the work that we're doing with the Public Spaces Master Plan, that as we go through the updates of it, and as we continue to look for, again, when we talk about the level of service, those numbers are going to be updated in sort of a more standardized cycle.
That's great. Right. So anyway, and I'll just say again, congratulations, job well done. I mean, I just think we're doing a great job and really appreciate it. And thanks to all of our commissioners, because there's an incredible amount of work that went, and a lot that went into this. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Gutschall.
Well, it's, I very much thank Ms. Hilton for coming and testifying. I know she's come, I think probably spoken to many of us at Open Door and otherwise. And I guess I wanted to frame this a little bit from my understanding in terms of, there's so much here. I don't think that I want to go into detailed responses, but does staff want to kind of respond generally to these recommendations and then maybe talk about how we're going to look at this and perhaps even, Mr. Chair, if there's a way that we're going to process this and moving forward in terms of these very detailed, specific recommendations that we've gotten. What's the process from here?
I would say, well, I'm giving staff a chance to determine what they're ready to respond to at this point. I will say from my mind, this is not just a matter of dollars and cents and some other actions that have yet to occur in terms of schools and pools. It's also an issue of philosophy and approach, which requires some policy thinking and guidance on our part, so we'll have to really kind of figure that out. But with that as a preamble, Ms. Rudolph.
Sure, thank you. And then Ms. Cowan might also address some of the school budget items, because again, as Mr. Dorsey related to, there's a lot going on in terms of, she's right, it's schools, it's pools, it's the county, there's the county, the general county transfer, and then there's also this they always call this DPR transfer that's been going on since FY10. And for the reason why that was created in FY10 was that previously DPR and the county ran the pools, and then that was transferred over to schools at the time for their oversight of it. And so that funding, that transfer was to help sort of offset costs related to the community swim program. So that's where that dollar amount came from. And it had just never was increased. And so when that started coming up, that was when we began to look at what's the best way to help to begin to sort of look at this O&M issue and the county sort of support of it. And we worked with schools this past year, trying to kind of figure out what's the best approach. And I think, as some of you said, this was the sort of way that we thought we could best approach at least increasing it. I mean, we're almost doubling what we're currently transferring as a part of it. We had some concerns, particularly related to our class participants, that we felt that they're registering with us. We felt like that if there was going to be an additional fee on top of it, it should come through with the registration to the county so that you wouldn't be paying once to register for a class, and then when you show up at the pool each time, or however you would fund it, but you'd have to either purchase a punch pass or a daily pass to also swim. That's sort of related to that recommendation. And so we felt that this $10 for each class was a good way to bridge the introduction of including O&M costs into our users. In a different in a different type of environment than usually what's just going into a community center or going into a park to participate in a program. I don't know, Ms. Cowan, if you want to add about APSs.
Yeah, and so I know that APS, while they have not yet reflected this increased transfer in their budget, it was just a timing thing, that when they do their sort of mid-budget update, they'll be including it along with their proposal for the impacts on their fee schedule, so you'll hear more from them. And then I think it's exactly right. That's a very big philosophical conversation. When do we recover O&M costs for all of our facilities? And do we set precedents here that we don't set in other places? So we need to be very careful about that and make sure we have the appropriate engagement with all the users, particularly of the class fees.
So is this potentially something, Mr. Chair, that is like a work session at some point?
Yeah, I think the wisdom of the board will guide that, and we'll certainly look to Mr. DeFerranti to sort of work with the commissions and staff to figure it out. But it seems like as we deal with fees for FY 2021 and things become a little bit more clear, that this is when we may want to think about this more holistically, because I could certainly see us coming up with various fixes, but those might be unfixed by future actions. So I don't know. I think we need to figure out carefully the timeline. No, not today. Not today. We're not having a full-throated session on the fees issue. Yeah. But at some other time, Ms. Hilton. Thank you.
So I'm happy to first I want to thank staff for diligence on this, and your answers just really help. And then I think it is wise to do some work to tee up and possibly come to you and get your review for a work session. I am going to want the input of everyone it's a ton of work that's here, and I also know you've thought about this, Ms. Brothwell. I feel like the philosophies are under there. We just have to lift them up and get concrete with recommendations to tee it up for you, Mr. Chair, and the rest of the board.
Sounds great.
I do want to.
Mr. Gutschall.
Yeah, Ms. Hilton, but I mean, I want you to understand that we want to have this conversation. It's just we can't do it right now in the budget.
Oh,
here.
yeah.
So we very much appreciate the effort that you've taken to educate me, and I think the other board members. And there are issues, there are things that are worthy of discussion. So I hope you don't leave here feeling that you haven't achieved something for all the hard work that you and the other members of the committee have done.
No, this will very much be part of ongoing work. Just we can't. I wouldn't advise that we conclusively try and do anything now until we've had more information and broader conversations. All right, any other questions and comments from members of the board? Okay, Ms. Hilton, Ms. Brothwell, Mr. Klingelhofer, and Mr. Ross, thank you all very much. Thank you to Mr. Holland, who was here earlier. And I will say, colleagues, we're continuing our streak of finishing every work session before the allotted time. We do want to wish our colleague who is not here, Katie Crystal, well. She and her husband, Steve, are the proud parents of a new baby boy. So that is why she is not with us today, even though, knowing Ms. Crystal, she may find a way to watch this work session later. All right. Mr. Schwartz, do you have anything else for us this afternoon?
I do not.
All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Considering we start.